Oh, recording in progress. Awesome. And I'm going to share my screen, maybe.
I'm assuming husband or something.
You not have the share option, Jen?
No, I'm just slow. Okay, there we go. Sharing my screen. Awesome. So just a thumbs up that you can see my slide deck, Brian. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, welcome to our, this is not right. First of all, it is not Service Cloud Voice, and this is not even the right date. Hold on a second.
Is
These
that the
are
right
the
deck?
right topics, but apparently this is not correct. So welcome to Winter 21 release. Or 22 release. Oh man, let's start over. Welcome to the October 12th Dreamforce highlights and winter release group. Thanks for everyone for joining. I am one of your co-hosts for today, Jen Bowen. I'm joined by Brian Kwong. And then also, I'm not sure if Square's on the line, but he helps us with the Milwaukee side of things. As most of you know, we alternate between Madison and Milwaukee. Feel free to reach out to us in all of the channels. Anytime that you have questions or need help, community group is always a great place to post those questions as well. Most of you know our mission, really, it's to succeed together. That is why we are here, as we can share information with each other so that we can be successful as admins and in our roles that we have in relation to Salesforce. We are always looking for speakers. So if you are interested in presenting at a topic, successes, failures, did you knows, we would be happy to add you to our agenda. Just reach out to us and we will get you penciled in. Lots of different groups popping up in the area. I need to update this slide too, because there is now a nonprofit group out of Milwaukee, which is super cool to see that is coming about. Certainly feel free to follow everyone on the Trailblazer community for their own local announcements and things like that. Shout out for MVP office hours. Again, I'm not sure if Square's on, but Square does head up MVP office hours with other MVPs. It's a great place. I think they do it like Fridays, every other Friday, maybe. There's a community group out there for them. Great to connect with MVPs and other people looking for help and crowdsourcing in that way. All right.
Yep,
So
next one is actually on the 15th.
Oh, perfect. So Friday, yeah, the 15th. Perfect. Lastly, job opportunities, celebrations, anything else. I do have 3 job opportunities to mention. First, I'll be selfish for myself and say Cerity Partners, where I work, is currently hiring for another Salesforce admin, as Aubrey provided some great feedback that she loves her job and loves working with me.
I really do. I'm dead serious about that.
You weren't paid to say that.
No.
You're not under coercion.
She's being paid right now.
Blink twice
I am
if
being
you need
paid.
help.
So if that's something that you're interested in, I will post it to the success community shortly after this meeting. There's also some other posts on job opportunities out there. I know I saw one recently from Brad. He apologized for the way that this came through, but if you ever have any job postings that you would like to post, please go ahead and post it here. It's the best way to communicate for this group. And then there is a third one that I will post as well. There's a consulting firm that's based out of, I believe, Iowa. It's completely remote. So I'll get that posted as well. If you have any questions about any of those things, feel free to respond in DMs on the success community, whatever works for you. So other than that, I will open it up to see if there are other opportunities or celebrations or anything else anyone would like to share. Please feel free to unmute.
I don't know if it was on the last call or if it's some of the chatter banter in the group, but you told me there was no Madison certification exam center, but they have recently opened it up. As this last week I scheduled for a new exam next month.
Oh my gosh,
You
I'm so
remember where it is,
excited.
John?
Do I remember where it is? I'd have to pull up my third email account to find out the exact.
That's
exam.
fine. I'm just curious.
Is it
if
the
it's-
same MATC center
It-
on the east side?
It's on the east side near the airport, I think. Somewhere
Yeah,
there.
probably the same place then.
Cool.
Yep.
That is super awesome because I like to have my piece of paper. Thank you for following up on that, John.
Yep.
If you can find that, John, and post it to our group, that would be amazing.
Yep.
To just say that it's now open and where it's located, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, no problem. I'll go for that. I'll do that now.
I have a quick shout out to Jen. I'm not on this group too often, but I haven't been here since June. I got a new job, but thanks for Jen for talking through and meeting with me before I decided what I wanted to do. But yeah, pretty happy where I ended up. Sorry, Jen, I didn't come work with you, but I can vouch for formally working with Jen. She is good to work with.
What are you doing now?
Oh, thanks. Yay.
So I'm a Salesforce administrator for a company called Drizzly. It's an alcohol delivery app based in Boston.
Do you got a discount code? What's the URL?
I do have one, but I don't know if I have shared it yet this month or not.
I was only
We can
kidding.
only share it once a month with a new person.
Well,
so.
next month you better
Yeah.
contact Andy because he obviously needs some kind of.
I need some booze,
Oh,
but
there is a standard one for free delivery if you just use Team Jenny. Yeah.
I'm writing it down.
So Team Jenny, when you check out, try that one.
I'm glad that you're enjoying your new gig. All right. Anyone else? Fantastic. Now my window got in my way. Here we go. Let's talk a little bit about Dreamforce. It says Dreamforce 22 again with the slides, man. I don't know what I was doing. It should say Dreamforce 21 because we are in 2021, but that's
How
okay.
did that get past the editor?
How did it? First of all, if you want to catch up on any Dreamforce sessions, check out Salesforce Plus. It's their streaming available to anyone and everyone. I'd also check out the Salesforce admin blog. All of these are linked, by the way. We will post these to the deck or the decks to the success page once the community Trailblazer group, once we are wrapped up. There was a couple of takeaways that I had, and I just wanted to go over them quickly and then also open it up to anyone else that has takeaways. But there was a lot of talk about Slack. So obviously, I think we've talked about it here in this group, but Salesforce acquired Slack. And with that, now we are hearing a lot of things like a Slack first mindset from the leadership team and from the Salesforce team itself. I personally don't have Slack at my company, so it's a little bit of a bummer, but I did see some really cool innovation with it as far as being able to integrate and manage Salesforce like approval processes and moving stages in specific records, things like that right within Slack, which was pretty cool. However, as a Salesforce admin, I want people to log into Salesforce and use it. So I'm a little bit on the fence there, but I definitely could see some enhancements to workflows by integrating your Slack and Salesforce instance. You can do that. There is an App Exchange app out there to help you with that, but also just the open API if you have your developer friends. And I'm sure that we're going to hear and see a lot more in the future. I'm going to mention Flow for a minute, and I'm not going to steal too much of Brian's thunder, but there's an amazing blog out there that Jen Lee posted from the admin group at Salesforce. What's happening with workflow rules and process builder. During Dreamforce, we heard that there is some retirement planning happen with these tools. Salesforce is really gearing us towards one automation tool to rule them all. Don't panic. We've got time. There's no set dates, but I would definitely check out that blog and start planning your migration from workflow rules to process builder. Brian will talk about from workflow rules to and Process Builder to Flow. Brian will be talking more about Flow. And I would imagine over the course of the next few sessions we have together, we're going to be diving more and more and more into Flow. I enjoyed the architect's keynote a lot. I'm not an architect. I don't really have ambitions to be an architect, but one thing that was awesome was the new diagram templates for Lucidchart. So there is a link here to the architect's page where you can actually in one click download an entire ERD for standard out of the box Salesforce schema, which is pretty cool. And then you can build off of that with your own customizations. So diagram, all of the things. And then finally, the other big product announcement that I saw was backup and restore. So Salesforce has a native data backup and restore recovery service. I'm saying specifically data because as I understand it, metadata, and Andy, please correct me if I'm wrong here, the
You're wrong.
metadata part of it isn't quite fully baked. I believe that they have.
No, it is. Sorry.
It is now?
Yeah, lots of confusing internal only slides have led to confusion.
But from what I was
unupdated
reading,
file.
it was only data. So
It is
talk-
data, metadata, files and attachments. Yeah.
for more information, talk to your Salesforce AE. I think
There you
is my
Yep, because the own website doesn't say metadata.
exactly.
Yeah.
So those
The
are some
thing
of the
is,
key
backup and-
highlights. Go
Backup
ahead.
and restore is a managed package versus part of the core platform. Thus, it will be receiving significant updates off cycle as things happen. So that is likely why you're seeing discrepancies.
Gotcha. Okay. So those were some of my highlights. I don't know if anyone else had something that they took away from participating in any Dreamforce sessions.
I see Squire's hand.
Squire. Hi.
Sorry, I can't agree with you enough that the architect session was mind-blowing and not architect specific, so it's definitely valuable. But I also got a lot out of kind of the forward-looking statements of the IT leader guide to the roadmap. They talked about a lot of the similar things, plus the stuff that's forward-looking statement scheduled for the next couple of releases, things like multi-object pages and admin filter related lists and the statuses of DevOps and priorities that are coming. So those two sessions I thought were really valuable just to be able to speak about the future of the platform and any opportunity that you have. So
And that was the IT leadership.
guide to the roadmap.
Perfect. I didn't watch that one yet.
Yeah, that was on Thursday as one of the last sessions, and it was fully recorded. It wasn't an audience one, so it was pretty quick to breeze through and jump over the stuff that you were unimpressed by. You know, they talked a little bit about things like MuleSoft Composer and CLI unification, and those things are very specific, I think, to certain roles, and so it was easy to jump around and get to the stuff that was really resonating. So I liked it a lot.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, moving forward. So Winter 22 release highlights that aren't Flow. So I have a couple of things I want to just talk about. I'm going to go through them really quickly. If you have questions, please let me know. There's a lot more in the release than what we're sharing, so please read the release notes. I know it's so daunting. But if there's anything that you can pick out that's relative to you, please check those out. They are really the best source. Want to mention multi-factor authentication to this group again. We've been talking about it for the last few months, but I think it's really important that everybody gets prepared and ready for MFA. On here, there is a lot of different resources to help you with it. Work with your IT department. The deadline still remains for February 1st of 2022. The FAQ document has recent updates. So please check that out if you are paying, if you're still working through your MFA. Shout out to Aubrey because she's heading it up for us at our company, and it's going really well as far as understanding what some of the requirements are. But we have definitely, working with our IT department as well, because some of it does get a little technical on what our current setup is and what applies and what doesn't apply. So I just want to throw that out there. Be mindful of it. Don't wait. Start looking at what's necessary now. I'm hoping maybe next month or possibly December, we can take a little bit of a deeper dive into it. Square just gave me the thumbs up because I think it's really important that we all make sure that we're covered with this specific requirement.
One thing I want to add to that, and it's covered in one of the updates for the FAQ, is that it's not like there's a magic switch that Salesforce is going to flip on February 1st. And now if you do not have MFA on, you can't get in. It's under their contractual obligation. So that essentially means that come February 1st, if you do not have MFA on, you can still get into Salesforce, but you are now working in Salesforce outside of the MSA. Take that what's for your. I cannot provide legal advice because I'm not an attorney. But just so you know, if something happens, don't panic. It's not like you're magically not going to be able to get in. But if you look and you go, there's an issue with us having MFA available and ready to go come February 1st, you're going to want to talk to your account executive.
Thanks, Brian. There's another tidbit in release notes that I've been monitoring myself. For anybody that uses cases, I hope that you've been paying attention to this as well. Cases, we have always used the reference ID field and capabilities to be able to tie all of our email correspondences together in one case, and that is now changing. So this should be in your release updates in your Salesforce org. If you currently have email to case turned on, you'll probably see it. I don't have email to case turned on currently in our production org, so it's not there. But I would definitely check out, again, the links here. We don't have a ton of time to go through it, but it has been pushed again. They keep pushing it, the enforcement of this, to summer of 22. So not next release, but the release after.
It's likely to get pushed again as well, but they're waiting for approval to get it pushed.
I think so we haven't implemented this yet in my org. My kind of rule of thumb is if you are implementing cases and email to case brand new, well, first of all, if you have a brand new org, it's automatically like enabled to use the ref ID, or excuse me, to not use the ref ID and use this new email threading behavior. But for me, as we implement cases, we're looking to just start using this new email threading behavior out of the gate and not using the ref ID. All right, so more release goodies. So again, I'm going to go through these really fast, and this was just the top ones that I thought were interesting and important. Check out the release notes for more information. Targeted prompts for in-app guidance. Well, kind of. What they mean by targeted prompts, which was, I believe, in beta before, is that if you have certain components on your page layout, you can use your in-app guidance and actually point to like the top, the left, the center of that specific component. So it's not specific to like a field level or anything like that, but your different components on your Lightning page layout. So it is kind of nice to be able to do that in specific areas, but I still found it a little limiting. Also, you can now curate your in-app guidance based on record types, which is definitely a good thing. If you're trying to call something out, there's probably different processes and ways to do things depending on your record types. So that's a great ability. Einstein search. I'm actually excited about this. I haven't played with it quite yet, but you can select and include now some objects specific to Einstein search. So what I like about this, or the way that I think about it anyway, is that Einstein search determines what you see for the results of searching based on your activity as an end user, right? So what this does is it allows you as an admin to say, but I always want the search results to be account, contact, opportunity, no matter what. And I think that's awesome for new users, because I've experienced this when I have a new user in the org and they don't have search results as of yet because, well, they're new. I can say, hey, if someone's searching, search for always accounts, contacts, opportunities, or a custom object. There are some limits there that they do recommend, 3 to 5 objects that they say to set as part of this for basically performance reasons. And this is something that you do assign to the profile level. But I definitely can see it being interesting for especially new users as they come into my org. Analytics. So when we're talking about reports and dashboards, I was saying earlier before the meeting started, Dynamic Gauge is currently in beta for dashboards. Honestly, guys, there's definitely some quirks with it that I have found trying to play with it. Check it out. I need to learn more about this. Honestly, I don't quite get it yet. In my use cases, I don't quite get it. But it's in beta currently, something you want to start just paying attention to as they make improvements to it. And then inline editing for reports. Again, this is still in beta, but they've expanded what you can inline edit. Dates, pick lists, lookup fields are now inline editable. And then text and numeric fields were editable previously. There is some also situations with security, because previously, if the field level security was set to edit, but then you had it on the page layout to set to read only, people could still make edits in your report because it was based on field level security. Now they're trying to make it based on page level as well. So if it's editable on field level security, but read only in a certain page, it looks like they're trying to prevent people from editing in the report. So again, this is still in beta. There's still quirks with that. People will get the little pencil icon. Looks like they can edit it in the report, but they can't actually hit the save button, for example. So something to pay attention to as they continue to add more functionality with inline editing for reports. Okay, we're almost done here. Dynamic interactions. This is neat. I would definitely check this out in the form of the Release Readiness Live, because they do a really good job going over it. But it's currently it's available for pages. So essentially the idea is you can click on one component in a page, and then like a list view, for example, maybe a address, and then the map component that you might have on your page will update depending on what you're clicking on. So it's kind of a cool idea, giving us a lot of flexibility on the Lightning pages. Again, it's all about use cases. Do you have that use case? Does this make sense for something you want to implement? Check out the release notes on more for that. They're also doing the same kind of idea in dynamic actions. And then along the top of your page, your bar. Again, this is pilot, but I'm excited about it because I think it's pretty cool that I could click a button along the top of the page and then have something appear or be different or be dynamic based on what button I push. So kind of a cool concept. Sharing profile permissions. Restriction rules are now GA. So restriction rules are available for custom objects. I think some standard objects as well, like contracts, tasks, events, those types of things. The idea here is, again, to really, if you're in a very highly regulated kind of industry, or if you want to make sure that, hey, my users have access to maybe the account page, but I don't want them to have access to the activity timeline, restriction rules are probably where you're going to be able to do that. Again, it's all about use cases, right? Do you have that use case? Is this something important to you to look into? Scoping rules, it's kind of new to beta. Basically, scoping rules don't restrict the record access that your users already have. Your users can still do things like open the records, report on all of the records that they have access to per your org sharing settings. But this also kind of provides a little extra regarding the scope of what they can see through different aspects of the org. So take a look at it. As an admin, I know things are getting really complicated as far as what your users can do and see. It used to just be simple. It used to be profiles and permission sets, and like that's about it. Now it's just really expanding with permission sets, groups, muting, restriction rules, scoping rules. It's getting pretty complex. One thing that can help with that is documentation. Just shout out to documentation there. Assignment expirations. I love this because I have a use case for this that I'll share with you. So basically you could have a expiration for a permission set. And let's say you have a group of users that are working on a specific project. You can actually set the expiration for that to be when that project concludes. So that way, as an admin, you don't have to like put it on your calendar or put it in your ticketing system to remember to turn off that permission set. We sometimes have certain groups of users that need to export reports, for example, and we don't just allow anyone to export reports. They might become part of a project where they maybe need to do that. And now I can set an expiration so that way, after that concludes, they no longer can actually export reports out of Salesforce. When it comes to Service Cloud, there are some new objects that we get with Service Cloud. Incident management. So this is pertaining to if you are using cases and there's a service disruption. It's really neat because now you can track the cases related to the issue, the problem, and then the actual incident. So really allowing you to track more large scale disruptions. If you have a product, maybe that's having a problem or something like that, you can utilize these new objects out of the box with Service Cloud. You do have to turn this feature on from the object setup page. So there's just a little toggle. So check that out when you get a chance if it's something you're interested in. And then there's also just related to cases and the email threading and all of that kind of stuff too. You can configure a default no reply address. This is something that's actually going to be enforced come spring of 22 with, I think, some of the changes that they're making with the other reference ID and email to case retirement, if you will. That was it for me. No demos today. Just talking about some of these things because all of the magic is happening now with flows and with Brian. Before I pass it to him, any questions, thoughts, anything you saw in the release notes that is worth mentioning for you? Squire.
Cool. Only because it was really recent that I was doing a POC for email templates. There's a couple new features that are hitting email templates, including columns and rows and tabs. And as painful as building an email template was in the past and having to maybe jump to HTML just to make things line up nice, that's really, really valuable. In fact, even to the point of like, we're going to re-engage with a couple teams that were unimpressed the first time because it felt like half of rich text, and now you've kind of got something you can do with it. So I thought that was really cool and kind of hidden.
And I know you can do that now with like email to case emails too, with the tables and things like that when you couldn't do that before.
Yeah.
So that's nice. So again, all these links and everything to the release notes and resources is in this deck. So we'll provide this shortly. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand it over to Brian. So there's so much flow goodies that he wants to talk about.
Yes. Okay. Jen, if you can watch the participant list, because we do have a couple people join in.
Yep.
All right. So I've been used to there being a lot of flow. And I would say if you remove like all the extra clouds and all the add-ons, it does feel like the release notes was very heavy flow focused. But one thing I want to mention, Jen kind of talked about it with the Dreamforce, was the announcement that Workflow Rules and Process Builder are going to get retired in the future. I would not say this is the time to panic and start migrating everything over, because you have the time to do it. And they, in that same session, they also mentioned making a migration tool, but who knows what that looks like and when that would be coming out. But I would say going forward, if you have new automation you're going to add, I would definitely say consider using Flow first if it makes sense versus using Process Builder or Workflow Rules, just so you have less tech debt when it is time to migrate. All right. So there's a lot of flow, a scary lot of flow. And I'm going to start off with just all the different slides and talking about things, and then we'll do some demos. So the first thing is Flow Orchestrator. This is kind of flow and kind of not flow. Andy did a really great demo for us. I think it was our last meeting on Flow Orchestrator. It is essentially a way for us to combine multiple flows together into a larger workflow process. That was an incredibly terrible way to explain it, but it is now available as beta. And so the things that we see here is the Flow Orchestrator, the productivity guide, and the bottlenecks. Those are all Orchestrator related. One is the component that goes onto the records. One is kind of like a reporting opportunity that lets you look at, hey, we have had this Flow Orchestrator go through multiple orchestrations, and I want to take a look at how that did, were there bottlenecks or places where the process slowed down. I will say, I would imagine there's going to be an extra cost for this when it becomes generally available, but there's been no official word from Salesforce on any details about that. Although no one has told me that yes, it's going to be included with our license that we have now. So I am anticipating there's going to be some cost, but who knows what that looks like. In the meantime, I think this is a great thing to play around with in a sandbox, but I wouldn't recommend making any plans to use it in your production environment for your general end users right now until there's more details over what the what the actual cost might be. All right, on to page 1 out of 11. I'm going to go through these, and at the very end, I have a bunch of demos that we'll do. Okay. The first one is the Optimizer app that kind of gives you a list of, hey, here's how you can optimize your Salesforce environment. Has been updated, so now it'll make recommendations for migrating your workflow rules over to Flow. I will call this less than useful because it literally just says, here's your workflow rules. Maybe you should consider migrating to Flow and giving an hour count where I don't know what they're basing that hours, but depending on your workflow rules and how many, I don't think it's all that accurate. But it's there for what it's worth. Then there's that run flow permission. And I was a little confused with this. So it's the checkbox on the user record. And I thought it was being removed for everyone. But if you drill into it and read it, it's just for experienced cloud users. So the people who are authenticating into your customer community, that run flow permission is no longer going to be applied to it. Send email notifications for every automated field update. I've read this particular one 3 times now, and I'm not 100% confident I understand what it means. My understanding is that if you have your automation going through the system and it makes updates to a record, and that update would normally result in an email notification going out. For example, you change the owner of a record. Right now, those notifications are being suppressed. And my understanding is that those notifications will not be suppressed and they will now send out. But I'm not 100% sure which notifications they're talking about, if it's things like the send a notification when you change the owner, or if it's like your own email alerts. I'm going to ask for clarification. I haven't heard back yet what that is. But right now, my understanding is it's things like the notifications that come out when you change the owner of a record. But I don't know. Something really small, if you have flows that get paused, now it's consistent that all the field values will actually say pause for pause interviews. Not one of those earth-shattering things, but it's nice for consistency. Flows had an issue where if you wanted to connect to an external system, say, oh, I don't know, Slack, you couldn't really do that really well, because when you're doing those type of API calls, there's that period where you need to do the call and then wait for the return. And Salesforce has added this concept of an asynchronous path. Basically, it means that when you have a record trigger flow, the record gets saved, the flow will execute, but then you have this extra path that's kind of like a scheduled path that just happens outside of the immediate transaction of the record being saved. And that can be used for connecting with outside systems. I really wanted to do a demo of that, but I don't have any external systems to actually use for a demo, so I couldn't. This is what I call quality of life. It's avoiding incompatible resource choices for choice components. So a choice component is something you would define when you are, say, changing a pick list or a multi-pick list or a radio button on a screen flow. And it was possible that you could actually pick a resource choice that wasn't compatible for what you said it was supposed to use. So like if you said, hey, I'm expecting text, or no, better, I'm expecting numbers, you could put a text and you won't notice that until you debug the flow, ran it, and then you got an error. Now it won't even give you the option to choose a choice that doesn't match your what you said you're expecting, which is nice, because it makes it less, you don't have to think about it as much. It's just, hey, I want numbers. Okay, here's all your number resource choices that you get selected, which is a nice change. Page 2, shortcut keys. There's a bunch of improved shortcuts. And again, one of those things that you can't demo, because what would you see other than my mouse not moving, things happening? But if you're a really keyboard heavy person, you may want to check out the list of all the new shortcuts available in Flow Builder. I don't use most of them anymore. I kind of got used to doing it, but if you like keyboards, it's a great thing for you to use. This is about more for like ISVs. So if you have a managed package that installs a flow, there's now options for the admin to be able to override and customize it. I'm not quite clear if the ISV has to do something specifically to make that happen. I think they do based on what I read, but that means there might be some more flexibility out in the future if you have managed packages that include flow. And I couldn't test anything because I don't have any managed packages that include flow. Some general changes for screen components. So the big thing is the screen components have been changed. So if they were just a Lightning component, they're now using Lightning web components. And if you're not a developer who's been keeping up with that, that probably is next to meaningless to you. But Lightning web components are a little bit better optimized, and they have moved the Components for address, display text, email, long text area, slider, and toggle over to an LWC. And with that, there's some extra things when it comes to validation messages and help text changes. So for an example, if you put a validate on that component, it'll do like a little pop-up to say, hey, that's the wrong type of input for that field. You need to change that. It's a lot more user-friendly. Same with the help text, it's more of a pop-up dialogue. Excuse me. The release notes have a really nice screenshot that kind of gives you an idea of what that would look like. But it's nice. It's a little bit more, again, consistency with how they're trying to move everything over lightning wise in general. All right, debug stuff. This is really nice. I believe it was the last release that we could start debugging record trigger flows, which was cool, except for if you had your record trigger flows going through on things like, hey, only fire at this field was changed, or you had a decision in the flow that it was based on is changed. You couldn't really debug it because you couldn't say, hey, change this value as part of the debug. You essentially had to say, here, use this record, and then completely ignore all the criteria, which was less than useful for debug purposes. But now when you launch the debug, it'll actually give you a whole window to let you say, hey, I want to change this field to that, this field to that. So you can mimic the actual changes a user would do that would result in the flow being triggered. So you can do a more realistic debug. And that's really nice. It also doesn't impact your sample record. So if you have a test record and you're using that, it doesn't actually change the values in the test record. It only gets changed in the context of your debug mode. Similar with that is we can now debug scheduled paths for those record trigger flows. So a scheduled path is basically a time-based action to say, hey, after this flow is been called and meets the criteria, I want to do these actions 1 hour after the flow is triggered, 2 days before this particular date, that type of thing. And we can now debug the scheduled paths in the debugger, which is really nice. Flow interview GUID, GUID. I think it's supposed to be GUID. No, it's regardless of what the value is, it's going to be in the flow email alert, and it's basically the specific instance of the flow that caused the problem. And since all failed flows are supposed to be like saved as a failed flow, that should help you find that specific issue. All right, page 5, more options for debugging. And so these are things like being able to show like the API names, showing governor limit consumption, which is really important. Being able to get just a little bit more information on the debugs. And those are things that you can turn on and off using the little gear. And I actually included the screenshot from the release notes. I particularly like the governor limit consumption, although that is something that is going to be explicit to your sample of your debug and not necessarily representative of your real world. Same for getting to the error details. And this is one of those weird things where if you read the release notes, it said, hey, you would click on this and sometimes it would take a while for the load and now it loads faster. I don't have any comparison of this is here's an example of how slow it was now, and here's how fast it is with the Winter 22 release. I'll have to take their word. One thing that is somewhat puzzling for me is being able to is hiding the error details for flows for managed packages. I kind of understand where this is coming from, where if it's a managed package flow and you're not making changes, you're not going to see the errors, so those errors should probably get suppressed from an end user standpoint. But at the same time, I get really frustrated because if there's an error in a flow in a managed package, I want something as a basis to have a conversation with whoever's providing that managed package of what's going on. But
it is what it is. For me, it didn't look like it doesn't look like a benefit to me, but I kind of understand where it's going because it's a similar behavior to how managed packages that Apex handles now. One of the last nails to put in the coffin for workflow rules was the fact workflow rules was the only thing that allow you to send outbound messages. And outbound messages is not heavily used, but there are apps that still use it. For example, Conga Composer uses outbound messages if you're using their workflow tool. And so now you'll be able to send an outbound message with a flow. And so there's almost no reason to create a workflow rule. There's the actions from Flow Builder to work with MuleSoft are now generally available. I don't have a listing of them or example because I don't have MuleSoft. But if you're a MuleSoft customer, that's something I would definitely take a look at. And then the associated errors with Lightning components for screen readers. This has to deal with the if you're vision impaired, and it just makes it more friendly if you're using a screen reader app to read your screen. So probably not something that will be applicable to most people. But I actually know customers who have screen readers, and so that's good to know that they're keeping that accessibility in mind. There's a pilot to make the screen components react to other components within the same flow screen. I'm not even going to ask to join the pilot. I want to wait for it to be beta, but it looks interesting is what I'll say. But I don't want to dive into the details because I really want to see it in beta first.
Do you think that this is kind of the same concept as like the dynamic pages and dynamic action bars and stuff like that? Maybe?
No, this is actually coming out of my team and is an adjustment or something we've been asking for years, is the ability to have you do an input on one component and it affects what the other component shows. So the example that they show in the demos is like if you search for a knowledge article, the next component actually shows the knowledge article. Our needs are around like doing math, like without having to go to another screen. Is the idea is that you could provide some inputs into a flow and have the results show on the same screen without having to go to another. That's where it's going. Anyway.
Yeah, not having to click next screen, right? It's kind of like doing dynamic visibility.
Yeah, kind of, but not
kind of.
Not really.
Right. But the
not at all. It's
of
not dynamic visibility because the components are already on the screen, right? It's
right.
Like enter how many children you have, and I'm gonna calculate your monthly benefit to be that times how many kids you have, and it all shows on one screen.
It's essentially like the equivalent of saying reload this component based on some other information that's already on the screen.
Yeah, I'm really curious how this is going to work out too. It's neat, but I don't know how you control all of the aspects that somebody might want one component to do to another.
Yeah,
right. And that's really why I want to wait to beta before I drill into it. But I like to see the direction things are going. Cool, Andy. I expect you to when that goes into beta or GA,
since it's your team, you could do the demo.
Awesome.
All right. I'm going to list some critical updates. Most of these we've talked about in the past, so I'm not going to really drill into all of them. But I did put out the release that they're going to be enforced in. Definitely take a look at some of these because they can be potentially problematic depending on what you're doing. The one that I find the most amusing is accurately measure the CPU time consumption on flows and process, because CPU time is one of the governor limits that we have with flow. And so the fact that this implies it was not accurately measuring, so you might have flows that were going way over the CPU time, but didn't throw an error because it was measuring not being in the CPU time, or vice versa, is interesting. So the other thing that I've seen things are like dealing with null record variables or null values with lookup relationships. I know people who have specifically built like a bunch of decision elements that check on whether a record variable was null. And that can be impact those types of flows. And then there's various other updates. So many that I had to put them on 2 pages. One of them is process builder related, and we went over this, I feel like 3 releases ago, where it's all about if a process builder makes an update to a record that triggered the process and additional criteria nodes need to be evaluated. The criteria nodes are using the values of the original record. I believe that's right. And I can see that causing some people problems because I've seen some crazy process builders that it looks like they're all chained together. And then the other one is just how pause flows are handled in, let me try that again. How paused flows can be resumed within the same context of the user. So if you have a user with a completely different access, it's going to be based off of whoever resumed it. So if someone has more access, in theory, it should have more access when they resume the flow, not to be the same as restricted as the person who launched it. Okay. I'm going to start with the demos, and I'm not going to jump back and forth between slides. So I'm just going to kind of go through the list, and then we'll go and take a look at the demos. But one of them is they're calling it like view all trigger objects and platform events. Essentially, it's flow list views, and it's really neat. I'm very happy for it, and I've been screaming about it for a long time, and especially now that flows are getting more complicated. And the automation thing, we really need it now. So we'll show you some of the things that are coming with that. Being able to call a flow from a record trigger to flow using subflow, this is huge. This is one of those things that I thought was required in order to do something like migrate a process builder, or to handle a larger, complicated kind of flow setup. It makes it very similar to how you can write things with Apex, where you can have methods essentially be subflows, and you can have more than one flow reference a subflow. But you couldn't do that with record trigger flows, and now we can. It is pretty nifty. There's a bunch of considerations with whether you should do it or not, and we might talk a little bit about that. But we definitely will be talking about it going forward, as we're talking about, if we're migrating workflows and process builder, how should we architect our flows? Rollback. This is really cool. There's an option now that you can add to your flows to specifically roll back record changes that occurred when an error occurs in the flow. So if you had a bunch of things that happened and got updated, and then you threw in an error, not all changes necessarily got rolled back. And now you can actually roll them all back. And that's actually a really nice thing, but you do have to do something in order to make that happen. This one was a really great timer. This is being able to change and customize the labels for your flow screen footer. So those are the buttons, like the pause, next, previous, finished buttons. You can change what they say. And that was great timing, because I had a customer saying, I want to be able to do this. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. And then literally I looked at the release notes. I'm like, guess what? You're going to be able to do that in a month. So that's great. Connecting more elements across the auto layout canvas. I've never run into this personally, but if you're using auto layout and you had a long flow, now it can be longer because it expanded how many you can have in there. This is really interesting from a governor standpoint. So you're able to set in the schedule path things like minutes. So before, I think the longest or the shortest amount of time we could do was like 1 hour after something happened, but now we can do it down to the minute, which is amazing. I don't think we could have really done that with workflow rules. And I think with process builder, you couldn't really do it specifically to the minutes. It was either as soon as possible or within 1 hour. The other thing is batching. You can actually set and say, if I have a set of records that are in this scheduled path, I want you to process them one at a time or two at a time. And that's really cool. I'm excited to try to break it. Things have gotten easier with just building flows in general. So I did a live stream a couple of weeks ago on how you can do workflow rules with flow instead. And now the screens have completely changed for the better. It reads easier. It's clear to what you need to set. And some of the language that I always thought was very confusing, like, and subsequently met the criteria, has gone away, and it's just much clearer. If you've never used flow before, now's the time to start using it because it's a lot more user-friendly. Going along user-friendly is loops in the auto layout are a lot more easy to understand. It's just laid out easier. It's nice. This is really cool. Editing choice resources directly from the flow screen. So if you had a pick list value and you had a bunch of choices, you couldn't modify them from there. You had to jump through a bunch of hoops if you need to make changes, and you don't have to do that now. Same with just setting them up. So it's really slick. And with that, we're going to get out of the boring stuff and we'll jump into the flow demos, because let's face it, that's what we all want to do. And I got to cheat to keep my list of all my demos on my other screen so I don't forget any. Okay. So the first one, list views essentially for flows. So this is kind of what we're used to. It's blah, lots and lots of flows. Hey, great. We know if it's screen or auto launch. We know if it's active or not, whoopee-doo. But there's a couple of different things. If I add select fields to display, there's a whole bunch of things I can do, including trigger and trigger object or platform event. And now I can see that, hey, this is a flow that runs after a save. This is a flow that runs before a save. And this is a flow that's for an opportunity. This is a flow that's scheduled. And that is amazing, because if we're going to end up building tons of flow, we need a good way to manage it and identify it, organize it. And with that were some list views that showed up. So one of them is there's just my triggered flows. So we can create our own list views, just like we can create a list view from an object. And if I wanted to, I can say, here's all my flows with the word opportunity in it. Here's all the flows that are just record here. And that's really nice. That makes things so much easier. All right. So that being said, now I have to remember which flow I used for which demo. So let's dive in. I believe it's my after for, yeah, here we go. Okay. So this is an example of an after trigger flow and where I'm using subflows. And the idea that I have with this is you can lay it out similarly to Process Builder. And, so Process Builder, we have all those criteria nodes. They're essentially decisions. So we get a bunch of decisions and then say the outcome for the decision is this. We're going to call this subflow as an action. And the alternative to doing that is, instead of having the subflow, you would have to have a whole bunch of elements going on the screen to show, what's in the subflow. And the downside to that is, if you needed to make a change, you now have to make a change to a flow that could potentially have a lot of other things happening in it. Where if you're doing a subflow, you could just modify the subflow. The other benefit is, if you have to do the same set of actions across multiple flows, you now can do that, because you can create one flow that's just an auto launch flow, not a record trigger flow, but just a regular auto launch flow. And you can now call that subflow across multiple record trigger flows. So just like, we'll use this as a terrible example. So like, if you're using workflow rules, you can create an email alert, and you can use that email alert in multiple workflow rules. You don't have to recreate the template. You don't have to recreate the recipients and all that other stuff. So if you needed to send the same notification every single time it changed your every other stage of your opportunity, you could do that. you couldn't really reuse actions in Process Builder. You had to recreate them. And same with flow. But now with the subflows, you can create your actions as in the auto launch and call the subflow for your actions instead, which is nice. It is the danger that I have with this is this looks really, really simple. And so you may not know the details of what's in the subflow. So it makes it more challenging to know, are you at risk of hitting, say, like the element limit? Because when you double click on this, your subflow is literally just the, hey, here's some inputs, and that's it. There's not a whole lot there. The other thing is you have to create the auto launch flow first to be called as a subflow. So you really do need to plan what your automation is going to be doing ahead of time. All right, let's see here. If I was doing this really smartly, I would have opened up all my flows to begin with. So I had the wonderful examples built out. One thing I will say is I went through and I actually built all these demos live. So if you do want to kind of see what that looked like, it is available out there. Let's see. Where's my wonderful thing? Okay. I need to go to ScreenFlow. So editing the buttons. So we have a screen here. And now if I expand out the configure footer, we have this option to not just whether we hide or show, but we can use custom. So if I don't want to show the finish button, I want to show something else, we can. So in this case, my flow is, hey, you're applying a discount across all your opportunity products. So instead of the word finish, the word apply discount would probably be a much better end user experience. And now I can do that. I really like that. It makes it a lot more simple. Going through and looking at discounts or choices. So we talked about this a little bit with doing some of the choice changes. And one of the neat things is this little edit screen. So if I went through and said, I really made a mistake with this choice and I need to make a modification, I would have to leave the screen. I would need to go over to the manager, find my choice in the list here, click on it, then click on edit. And that worked, but it was kind of terrible. Now, if I need to make a change, I can click on the little pencil here and I can immediately come in and say, well, this is really not 10%. It's really supposed to be 13%. And even though this is a terrible thing to do because my API name is still going to say 10%, I can change that, and it changed it immediately within my flow. And that is really nice. It's a nice user experience. The other thing is when I'm creating new choices with this, it limits down the list. So you're not creating a new resource, you're specifically creating a new choice, and it makes it a lot more easier to create them. The other thing I like is it immediately put the value that I created directly in the choice, so I don't have to retype in and select it. It just did it.
Can I just tell you guys how much I'm excited about the choice changes?
Why are you excited about it, Jen?
I always found it to be very cumbersome to work with choices, create choices, like you were saying, going back into the manager and finding and changing, and oh my gosh, I don't know what it was, but it always tripped me up, and I'm so excited that they've streamlined it. So yay.
Yeah, I like it. All right, so now the question is, where is my example
With the rollback, because I know I built it. Maybe I didn't save it. Wouldn't that be terrible? Where is... Nope. Well, that's terrible. That's awful. But here it is. So there's the rollback option now, which essentially it's just an element and there's nothing to it. It's just a label. And so you would do this as a fault line. So if I had this update product and I go, if there's a problem with an update, say it tries to update a record and it hits a validation rule, I want it to provide a fault. And one of the things you might do is if it's a screen flow, you would show a screen so you can have a much nicer friendly error message than your flow failed. But if you had maybe a bunch of updates earlier on in the flow, you might want to come through and say, let's do a rollback here. And so when this faults, it basically resets what your system looked like before the flow got launched. And there can be some really nice use handles for that. Where is my, let's see, did I do it in here? Oh, I didn't do it in here. This is terrible. I'm gonna have to rewatch my own video to figure out what the heck happened to my one flow with that one demo. But let's take a look at creating a brand new flow, because I do want to show how much simpler it is. Is you click new flow. We have a couple things. One, if you want to, you can try the beta for Orchestrator. You just need to click this all plus templates. And then you can get our record trigger orchestration or auto launch orchestration off of the template. So that's where you would get that if you want to play with flow orchestrations while they're in beta. But if we do a record trigger flow, and we'll pick our layout. So this screen is a little bit clearer. And one of the nice things that I like about it is down here where it says optimize the flow for. This basically is dealing, do you do it before the record is saved or you do it after? And prior to Winter'22, the language for this was okay, but I really like how they changed this to give you examples to say, hey, if you're going to update a record and perform actions like send an email, do it after. If you're updating the fields on the record that triggered the flow, you can do it before. That's really nice. The other thing that's here is this include asynchronous path checkbox. So that is that connection to an external system, which I don't have to show you. And let's go through to, where's my record trigger? This is screen. So here's where I want to go. So I'm going to add a schedule path and we'll put in a path name. This is going to be terribly labeled. So we have our wonderful little choices for what date or based off the flow being triggered. Let's go based on the last modified. And now instead of saying just hours, days, we can now do minutes after. And now we can also define the batch size with the nice little handles. If you do not put this in, the default is 200. But we can go through and say, hey, we really wanted this to be 10. And now if I go and let me add a fake assignment because I just realized I don't have anything out there. Wonderful. So now I can, if I am not using the auto layout, I can drag in a separate path. So here's my run immediately. Here's the path I just set up. Or if I do auto layout, you now get the whole path coming off to the right here. And we can add additional paths to the list. So that works somewhat similar to time-based workflow. One thing I do want to call out is what's different is from flow versus process builder. With process builder, we say, hey, I want to fire this process when a record opportunity record is created or edited. And then we would have a criteria note that says, if the stage is changed and the stage is currently closed one, I want you to send this email note immediately, and then 60 days later, send it, create a renewal opportunity, right? We can't replicate that exactly in a single flow. And the reason for that is the scheduled paths are queuing off of the start element, not your decision that you have in the run immediately here. So that means if you want to say, I want to have my renewal opportunity created, but only after the opportunity is closed one, the way you would do that is you would set that criteria in the start element. If I can spell close correctly, there we go. Into the start element, and that is what it will use to determine whether or not your items are run immediately or go through the path. So if you have a whole bunch of different time-based stuff that is happening on with different criteria, essentially those are going to be separate flows, because I can't think of a different way to really do that optimally here. So that's one thing to think about if you're planning your automation, is that's going to be different. I don't think there's a way that we're going to ever go through and say, hey, you're only going to have one flow per object or two flows per object, because it's going to depend upon what do you have for time-based actions. Excuse me. And what else are you doing? I think that is everything. It's a whirlwind, it's a lot. But it's really is getting to the point where if you've never touched flow before, now is a good time to do it, because it is becoming more and more user friendly. There is still a little bit of a learning curve with learning what things are called out. But if you were just a workflow user and you were going, well, okay, I want to stop being workflow users and I'm going to be doing everything with flow and I'm going to migrate my workflow rules, with the exception of again, time-based actions, most workflow rules transition really, really easy. They're all simple flows, really, really simple flows. There's not a lot of worry about doing things, because workflow rules can't do a lot of the complicated things that we can do in flow. Where I see people getting caught up is when they start doing more complicated things like, hey, a record's going to update, and then I want to go grab a whole bunch of records that meet some criteria, and then I want to go through and grab a bunch of more records related to those records, and then do a bunch of stuff. And that's where a lot of things break down. Or if you're trying to create a bunch of automation and it's a really heavily used object, meaning you're doing imports or a lot of API calls, where you may have thousands and millions of records being passed, updated all at once in a transaction. Depending on what your automation is doing, it may or may not be a good idea to use flow in those circumstances. Anyone have questions? I wasn't monitoring the chat.
I was, and it was quite funny. I don't think there's any specific questions regarding flow, just some comments about button relabels, which was pretty funny. But yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to unmute or post something in the chat. I can't believe we got done early.
I went fast.
It was really fast.
It was really fast.
You made a comment, Brian, and I'm gonna talk. I want to talk about this more, because I feel like this is one confusing thing to me, and I know that you just said it, that it really depends. We've always been told as admins have one process per object and all that stuff, and I know it's going to be different for flows. Can anyone really think of reasons that, like, things to be mindful of as we think about migrating our workflow rules and process builder into flow?
I'm less worried about workflow rules. The biggest caveat with workflow rules are time-based actions. Because in that circumstance, you're going to want to create a flow per set of criteria for your time-based actions. And by that, I mean things not like have a different flow for 1 hour versus 2 hours after something, but if the actions are only supposed to happen when a record meets certain criteria, that criteria has to be defined in the start element for your scheduled paths to work.
So I have a scenario right now where we have one scheduled flow that runs at 8 p.m. And the criteria for our start node is pretty basic. It's essentially if the account is a client, run this flow. And thinking through this more, I think that we ended up branching in that flow 2 separate processes that run, if you will. So essentially, there's a decision in that there's the start element. There's the decision that says, hey, is this client of the record type, X?
Mhm.
And if it is, it goes down one other path of decisions and it takes action. And if it's not, it goes down this other path of decisions and take actions. Thinking through that more, and especially what you just said, we could certainly update our scheduled flow and the start node to say it's a client type and it is of this specific record type. Run this set of logic, and then we could have a second scheduled flow that is the kind of more generic in our decision node. Like if it's the client type, then run this. My problem with that though is that the specific record types need to take both actions in my flow, if that makes sense. So the specific record type needs to do things that's specific for that record type, but then it needs to continue on to the rest of the flow to do the other stuff because it's still a client type. And perhaps subflows now would be the answer to that question.
Maybe. One thing I realized that I did not talk about is the ability to loop back to some other point in your flow with the auto layout.
Oh,
so this is really nice. And I found my rollback example. So if I had a situation where if an error occurs updating the record and I want to take them back to a screen, I can do that really easily with not without the layout, where I can go, okay, here's my fault, and now take this element and I want you to go back to the beginning of the first screen. That's really easy to do in without the auto layout with beta. So that was one of the reasons where I've been basically not using the auto layout, was because I had tons of flows that tend to creep back in and I don't like toggling between the two. But we can do that now. So if you click in, there's actually the option to connect to element. So this is under the plus sign from your last element, and you can, so hey, I'm going to connect to an element and I want you to connect to this element, and you see there's plus signs underneath. So I'm going to connect to the introduction screen, and now my flow, instead of saying stop, says introduction. And here you can see +1 connections. So it's not completely correct because you don't see a direct line going from here all the way back up to here like you do without the layout. But it does give you the start of the name. I really wish it would give you the hover over for what the connection is. But in this example, it's really easy because it's only one connection to one element.
Hopefully
That's
they
nice.
add more to that, because I agree if I clicked on that, I'd want it to like at least highlight where the connection goes to, or have a
Or-
line.
Yeah. Oh, there it goes. Introduction screen. There, hover over. It just
Oh.
took a while to load.
So if you turned off the auto layout, would it draw it? I'm
Yeah.
just curious. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. It's just if I move things around and then you turn on the auto layout, you can lose how you laid out your
Yeah.
elements. And the other thing I've had issues with is if I don't have all my elements connected, weird things happen. So I've been known to like create like debug sections. So when I'm building the flow, I use the debug sections, and then I will disconnect them from the flow, but I will keep them there. So if something happens after we go live, I have those debug things I can just kind of insert back in and test out. But and then the other thing, where's my record trigger flow? Fine, I guess I'll save. I want to show, so now we can select the path. And now I can select an opportunity. And away it goes. Let's see. I think I actually had a wonderful little example. I think my example was doing with this is what happens when I try to build demos ahead of time, is I forget my examples.
I got a question.
Yes, ask.
Have you found out any way from the flows to deal with the is cloned issue? Because my organization does a lot of cloning of opportunities and quote records and other custom objects, and so we set up workflow actions to deal with that. But as far as I know, there's no way of doing is cloned stuff in flows yet.
I don't think there is.
Yeah.
I don't think that's exposed.
Yeah, it's not one of the. Every time they do an update, I always do a search just to see.
Well, there's a clone source ID.
That's good to know.
So maybe see what that is.
Yeah,
I haven't tried it.
Yeah, we just have to get passed forward. Okay.
Yeah. Well, my point is, if it's a cloned record, it may have the ID of the record it was cloned from.
Yeah, it generally does, and yeah, and then it would have. Then you could just do a, hey, is cloned? Is it?
Is it not blank?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So okay, thank you.
Yeah. This was my rollback demo. So I'm gonna go through and change my close date. I think I have to change this to December. Did it work? I think it worked. It's just not showing what I was supposed to. It's supposed to show my validation error. I swear that worked when I was building the demo to begin with, but I'm probably doing the demo wrong.
Well, we can catch your recording of when you built it.
Yeah, that's why I recorded it, right? Any other questions? Okay.
I did put the deck out on the community. We'll add the recording. We'll also add the link to Brian's build out recording of when he did all of this stuff streaming live. But otherwise, if you have any questions, or if you're utilizing some of these new options as you build out flows, or you're converting your workflow rules, we'd love to hear about it. So please share in the community. Let us know what you're working on, what you found helpful, what you found challenging, so we can all learn. So with that, thank you very much.
Yay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
See, now I got it to work. I must try to save the right version. Oh,
Nice.
yay.
All right. Thanks, Brian. See you later.